Okay, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be with you. As I said, Rabbi Blake is with our rabbinic intern today at HUC in New York, watching his senior sermon. And last week we did some great studying. We continued our exploration of the Talmud and the boundary of life and death by exploring two signature sugyot, which are passages. That's how we say a chunk of Talmud, and each of them were about our existence after death. So we did Rosh Hashanah 16b and Sanhedrin 90a. Both passages entertain notions of the judgment that awaits us in the hereafter, and we'll continue with that today. And the passage from Tractate Rosh Hashanah 16b also introduced us to the notion of the end of days and the final day of judgment for all humankind. In this piece, we got to glimpse Gehenna, fortunately or unfortunately, perhaps, where the damned are sent if found irredeemably wicked. We compared today's study, we compared last week's study to previous considered literature from Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Tshuva, which drew heavily on the passage from the Talmud 16b. And then we also studied Sanhedrin 90a, which picked up on a similar theme, but considered criteria rather than to get into Gehenna, this hell-like place. I hesitate to say hell because it's not really quite the same. Instead, to get into Olam Haba, the world to come, which is certainly vaguely understood by our sages and perhaps even more vaguely understood by us today. But there are a lot of different descriptions of it, and we might see one today. Strikingly, we saw a number of us who were uncomfortable with what was a so-called apikoros or Epicurean whose philosophy of life is oriented toward the pursuit of ephemeral pleasures instead of eternal worth. These claims reveal the rabbis of the Talmud drawing lines in the sand that may serve chiefly to differentiate Judaism from Greek philosophy, which is to be considered as a rival tradition. Not so much anymore, but certainly at that time, particularly when Hellenism was the prevailing culture. Okay, so last time we were all together, we stopped right after the first chunk of this shocking Mishnah. So we're going to pick up with that now. Okay, here we are. So this is what we read last time. We just read the first chunk. We're here on Sanhedrin 90a, as you can see at the top, and I'm sure that Safaria will want to jump around, so bear with me on that. We read this, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek leolam haba shene'amar ve'amech kulam tzadikim leolam yirshu aretz netzer mata'ai ma'aseh yadai lehit pa'er. So all Jews, all of Am Yisrael, every single person has a share or a piece of the world to come, Olam Haba. As it's written, and we have this nice verse, and your people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, for my name to be glorified. In order for God's name to be glorified, Am Yisrael should inherit the land. Okay. And Am Yisrael should inherit Olam Haba, a piece of Olam Haba. And then we have a very different moment. Ve'elu she'ein lahem chelek lo'olam haba. Hold on. I thought all of Am Yisrael inherited a piece of Olam Haba or got a share in Olam Haba. Not so. Here are the people who will not have a share in Olam Haba. Ha'omer ein tichiyat hametin min haTorah. So the person who says that the revival of the dead or the resurrection of the dead is not in Torah. Ve'ein Torah min hashemayim, and the Torah isn't from heaven. And also, I'm just going to let a few more people in here. So you'll hear a little ding. That's okay. And then finally, this epikoros, which we talked a lot about. The epikoros comes from this word Epicurean, who was a Greek philosopher at the time, and a prevailing one at that. And this was really an opportunity for the rabbis to differentiate themselves from the prevailing Hellenistic culture. So we read this and we were a little dismayed. There was some serious dissatisfaction at these ideas here. And we're hoping that it's not just about thinking these things, but also proclaiming them, right? We can believe all kinds of things that we'd like to believe. And of course, we should have an openness to other ideas. And yet we don't want to proclaim them as, at least according to this text. I would say that perhaps that ability to think but not proclaim really allows us to be a little bit more generous with the text. But we'll see in the next piece, in the next chunk, that it's not only this thinking, it's not only even this action, it's specific actions, which we will find in a second. So now we come to Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, and as Rabbi Blake has shown you, and as we all do in the clergy suite, we can just click on his name here, and Safaria will tell us who he is. So Rabbi Akiva, he lived about around 110, 135 CE. He was a fourth generation Tana. He was a student of Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yoshua, but quickly became their colleague. In fact, there's this amazing story about how he met his wife around 40 years old, and he came across this rock that had little drips of water dripping into it, and it created a hole in the rock. And he said to his wife, Rachel, who you can see here, he said to his wife, you know, do you think that I could learn Torah? Do you think that I could be like this rock and really have an unbounding understanding of Torah? And she said, yes, of course you can. Just learn drip by drip. And so Rachel, his wife, is really given all of the, what is the word that I'm looking for? Given all of the credit for this great Torah scholar. At the height of his glory, he is reputed to have had 24,000 students, yet these students died prematurely, and his prolific teachings were passed on by a small elite following. In the face of Roman persecution, he supported the Bar Kokhba's revolt and eventually died as a martyr. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Af hakore basfarim hachitzonim. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva is adding to the people who are not going to get into Olam Haba. And he says also, these people who read Sfarim, books, hachitzonim. And I had to show you this because it really highlights a piece of what we do in text study. We have here an amazing opportunity to just click on the word and go to the Jastrow dictionary, and you'll see right here we have, as we say in the clerical world, a Jastrow bonus. You can see right here Sfarim Hachitzonim. It's just the haha there, but that's the abbreviation, and it says profane books. So these are not just things that are external to Judaism, not just, of course, during this time, especially in the time of um, the couple generations after Rabbi Akiva, though not so much during his time, but after Rabbi Akiva, he it was really a part of the education to have some kind of secular education. And many of our sages, a few generations after him, were businessmen or doctors, certainly served in the Sanhedrin as lawyers. Jewish law, of course, but they had more education than just our Jewish texts could offer them. So this is not including those kinds of educational texts. This is including something that's profane, something that is really going to disturb our tradition. Okay, then we continue. V'hacholesh al hamaka ve'omer kol hamachala asher samti b'mitzrayim lo asim alecha ki ani Adonai rofecha. Okay, so he also says, and the other person who is not included in Olam Haba is a person who whispers over a wound or whispers over some kind of cut, some kind of physical a physical limitation that was cast on them, and we see this word hamaka, and it means wound, but we also know that the word makah is the same word used for plagues. So we see this word makah, and then we have this verse from Exodus, and we'll just read the English for that. Every illness that I have placed upon Egypt, I will not place upon you, for I am the Lord your healer. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, if you whisper this verse over a wound, over a makah, then that's also a reason to exclude you from Olam Haba. And I'm wondering what you think of that. Why do you think that that was reason enough to exclude somebody from Olam Haba? Yeah, Judy, go ahead.
I had actually a comment on the earlier passage, one who
Sure.
reads external literature. Can I just, Rabbi Schindler was once at WRT uh, speaking about outreach, Jewish outreach, and widening our world so that we can accept people who are other
Mm,
than born Jews. Anyway, what he said about that was once a student or a child is exposed to the world literature, and
mm.
then they're lost to our Hebrew, our Jewish tradition, and that was
Wow.
something that would be relevant to people who are extreme, ultra Orthodox, Haredi, who really don't allow the external world. They're not teaching English using Shakespeare as the source, and that was a pretty strong statement. But it is something that indicates how closed we have to be to maintain our religious fervor.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised to hear that he would say something like that.
It was a long time ago, but he
I
did.
guess so. I
Oh.
guess so. Doug and Marge.
Uh, Two things, Rabbi. Number one, uh, does this passage suggest that there was the first century equivalent of like the Grove Press? You remember back from the 60s, where you could get a copy
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Lolita or, stuff like that. That comes as really something kind of outre, that there was an underground press in the first century.
It's
I wonder.
interesting that you say that, especially because, we see the word Mishnah and we also see the word Tana over and over again. We're going to see it in a few minutes too. And this word actually doesn't mean teaches, right? We say, and he taught, right? Or and it, the text taught. It actually means to repeat, because people at this point were not reading so much. They were actually repeating things over and over again and memorizing our texts. That's why so many of the rabbis can so readily quote, we'll see in a few minutes, some random piece from Chronicles, right? Who among us has read Chronicles in the last 15 years?
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting that all of that is just in their heads, and it really points to a lack of memory that we have today because of the written word.
The other thing, it seems, the second part of that passage, waving a rock over a wound and invoking the holy, that seems dangerously close to sorcery or witchcraft.
Beautiful,
And I
beautiful.
think that's probably where the prohibition would come from.
That's right. Okay, so there's a prohibition against sorcery there for sure, and it's I think it's too close for comfort for the rabbis for sure. But it's not just about sorcery. And I read this amazing piece from the Zohar that's complementary to this, and it says that you wouldn't do this because if you were to do this, you would be implying that God is going back on God's word and in fact placing the illness that God brought to Egypt on you as a Jew. So you have to do there is some like mental gymnastics there, but I think certainly for all of the lawyers who do this for their jobs, this is what this text is implying. It's implying that all of those things that God said specifically in this line, right? Every illness that I placed upon Egypt, I will not place upon you. You're going back and you're saying, actually, God is doing just that. God is placing these illnesses, these makot, on me right now. And so that's really, I think, the underlying piece. Sorcery on the surface level, and calling God a liar on the deeper level. Okay, so we keep going, and then we have Abba Shaul, and Abba Shaul is a frequently cited, not rabbi, doesn't have the title of rabbi, though Abba really means father. So perhaps he was some kind of patriarch in the society. Though he didn't have a specific role, and he is often in connection with Torah, with temple service, though not specifically here. He lived in the same generation as Rabbi Akiva and dug many of those graves for those martyrs who were killed after the Bar Kokhba revolt, or a part of the Bar Kokhba revolt, depending on where you want to date it. So Abba Shaul says, and I'll kind of scroll down so you can read in the English too. Af ha-hogeh et Hashem be'otiotav. Okay, so Abba Shaul, first of all, he uses this word hogeh, which is a really interesting word. We'll just read the English of it. Also, these people who say the name of God, or somehow pronounce the name of God in God's letters. So basically saying that tetragrammaton, which I guess at this point people were still able to pronounce or knew how to pronounce. I imagine it was kind of going out of style in the next, or not going out of style, but fading into history in the next 10 or 20 years after this was said, if we want to believe that these people were actually saying these things. So I want to look at this word hogeh. Hogeh is an interesting word because it's translated here as pronounces, but it actually has a meaning that goes back to this boundary between Greek and Roman and Hellenistic culture and Jewish culture, because hogeh actually means philosopher. And it also, if you look at the root, you'll see a hey, which is sometimes transformed into a mem, and then you have the vav, and then you have the gimel. So This is also the same word that's used for the phrase mugot lev, which means someone who shows cowardice of heart. So even this word that kind of means philosopher at the time, and we can even see if it's in if it'll yeah, here we go, thinker philosopher. This is used as like a derogatory word in our Mishnah here. So we're seeing even more the solidification of these, quote, lines in the sand. All right, let's keep going. So then we don't stop there. In fact, shlosha malachim va'arba'a hediot, which you can hear what that is a cognate for. Ein lahen chelek le'olam haba. So it's not just those people that we've already named who have said the Tetragrammaton, who have done this thing over a wound, who have read literature that they're not supposed to read, who have proclaimed all of these things. Also, we know some people in our text who are not getting in. And there are 3 kings, and for the word in English that's used is extremely generous, commoners. The word in Hebrew is hediot, which you can just call it out, what it sounds like. Anybody know? So hediot is the Aramaicized word for idiot. Yeah, I see some laughter going on. So the English here is extremely generous. And then we have these shlosha malachim, these 3 kings named. So shlosha malachim, Yerovam, Achav, Menashe. Okay, so who are these people? I think that there's certainly lesser known people in our Tanakh. Yerovam ben Nevat was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel and led the revolt against the rule of the Davidic dynasty. So he split 10 of the 12 tribes off and formed the northern kingdom of Israel, which competed and had a temple in opposition to the Judean southern kingdom of Israel. So he is charged with, well, I'll let you simmer on that. He's charged with this splitting off of the community. So perhaps that's why he's not let in to Olam Haba. Then we have Achav. So Achav ben Omri, he, you might remember, was married to Jezebel. And often his name is Ahab. But Achav in Hebrew was the 7th king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and he was known as a wicked one. He allowed foreign worship to flourish under his rule, and thanks to his wife Jezebel's influence. And Jezebel is where we get that slur of that person is such a Jezebel. And was willing to arbitrarily dispossess his subjects. Now, he got into this situation with his neighbor, Navot, or Navoth in English sometimes. And his neighbor owned this ancestral property, and there was this beautiful vineyard on it. And, Achav was really interested in buying this vineyard. So he attempted to get it fair and square. We'll give him credit there. He goes up to Navot. He tells him how beautiful his vineyard is. He gives him lots of compliments. And then he says, I'd really like to buy your vineyard. And Navot says, absolutely not. I'm not selling it. So when Jezebel finds out about this, she conspired to have Navot killed on false charges of cursing God and the king. So Navot is killed because of that, and Ahab or Achav takes possession of the vineyard. So it's really this kind of crazy story. In the end, God dispatched Elijah to tell Achav, and I quote, just like the dogs licked Navot's blood, so shall they lick yours, and Jezebel will be eaten by the dogs. So that ended up happening also. So, he didn't really have such a great fate in the end. And I guess he also did not get into the world to come, Olam Haba. Okay, finally, the third king, Menashe ben Chizkiah, the king of Judah. So he was the king while Yerovam was the king. And this isn't the Menashe of Ephraim and Menashe. This is a later person. And we have a little bit of a discrepancy here, which is kind of beautiful, actually. So we have Rabbi Yehuda come here and try to defend Menashe. Rabbi Yehuda says, Omer, Menashe yesh lo chelek leolam haba. He should get a piece of olam haba. Shenamar, as it says, and here's our verse from Chronicles, as promised. And this is talking about Menashe. Vayitpalel elav vayishma tichinato vayishivehu Yerushalayim lemalchuto. Okay, so he prays to God, and God hears his penitence. God hears his supplication. And then we get this beautiful word, vayeshivehu, which is the same word as teshuvah. And God brings him back to Jerusalem and his kingship. So it's a moment of redemption for Menashe, but it lasts only a short time. Our Chachamim come in and they say, Amrulo. The Chachamim say to Rabbi Yehuda, L'malchuto heshivo, v'lo l'chaye haolam haba heshivo. So his kingship, the malchuto, he gets back. It's returned to him, but not his entrance, not his ticket into olam haba. Okay, so that's those are the kings. Now we have the arba'ah hediot, the four commoners. We'll say. We have Bilam, who we know from the Balak Bilam story. He's the guy who gets up 3 times and says and attempts to curse Am Yisrael in the book of Numbers, and every single time, instead of cursing, he blesses them instead. The third one being Matovu Halecha Yaakov, how wonderful and beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. Then we have these 3 people who you may not know, and actually I had to look up one of them. So you're certainly. Hold on. Let's mute ourselves. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, one of them I had to look up, so you are in good company. So we have first Doeg, and we can't see both of them at the same time. That's okay. We'll just come down here. So we have first Doeg. This guy is an Edomite who served King Shaul, King Saul. He carried out the executions of a number of priests who helped David when he was fleeing Saul. Okay, so that's his claim to fame, Doeg. He's in like 2 chapters in the book of Samuel. Then we have in Samuel 2, Achitophel. He has such an interesting name. Achi meaning brother, Tophel meaning who fell, or who was no more, or who didn't quite succeed. The fancier English is my brother, my folly. So he was a counselor of King David and a man greatly renowned for his wisdom. However, during Absalom, King David's son, attempted usurping of the throne, he deserted David and supported Absalom fully. and he then became one of Absalom's advisors. Okay, so we might be seeing a theme here, and Peter will get you in a second. And then we have finally we have Gehazi, who was a servant of the prophet Elisha, who was the teacher of Elijah, and he enjoyed a position of power, but was ultimately corrupt and misused his authority to cheat Naaman the Syrian, a general afflicted with leprosy. So, as punishment, Elisha cursed him and transferred Naaman's leprosy to him and all of his descendants. So, not only is he not getting into the world to come, but he is also in this world, the one before the world to come, really suffering. Okay, so a few questions. Now that we have an understanding of who these people are, why do we think that these are the people who are not getting into Olam Haba? And it seems like we have some guesses already. Peter, go ahead.
Well, if they've all done something wrong, but so have lots of other people. So this seems like a random selection of people who've done things wrong. I mean, you could go through Tanakh and find dozens more. So why these people particularly?
Yeah, beautiful. It's strange, right? Why don't we see like Amalek? Why don't we see people like that who aren't here? Why don't we see Haman? I wonder what that's supposed to be telling us. Joe, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Joe. Joe, you gotta unmute. Oh, we can't hear you. Okay. Type it in the chat, Joe, and we'll read it out. So we have these three kings who are symbols of not getting into the world to come. They are all Jewish kings. They are all Israelite kings. Yerovam, the first king of the Israelite kingdom, right? Then we have Achav, this guy who was clearly really led by his wife, but also by his own greediness. We have Menashe, who eventually repented, but he was not allowed to get into the world to come anyway. And then we have these four Hediot. Yeah, Marge and Joe, go ahead. It looks like we can hear you now. No, maybe not. I wonder why that is. Okay, I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead, Doug and Marge.
The first king you mentioned, could you tell me again, please? The first king?
Yerovam.
And he was responsible for splitting the kingdom in two. So I'm guessing the redactors of this passage didn't like the fact that this was a competing cult, let's say it, to the not cult, but religious center to Jerusalem. So the Levite structure from the center of power in Jerusalem was probably very unhappy that there was a competing religious site in the north. Close to the truth there?
Totally. Almost exactly. That is the reason, not for Menashe. Menashe was the king of the kingdom of Judah in the south. He had a number of challenges, but he eventually repented and eventually got his kingdom back. The there is a real issue with Yerovam and also with Doeg, Achitophel, and Gehazi. So you're right on almost all of them historically. I wonder what the deeds are. If anybody has any ideas about why these specific deeds were an issue, other than they split up the kingdoms.
I'm going for it.
Okay, so we also have a piece that says that each of these four people, even though it's not really recorded in our text, except for Bilam, we certainly have for Bilam, were at first given the opportunity to not engage in the kind of sinning that they were going to do, right? We remember that Bilam is told that eventually by God he's allowed to go on his journey, but then he hops on his donkey and there's a malach shel shamayim, an angel of God, an angel of heaven, blocking his path with a sword that only the donkey can see, so much so that Bilam ends up smacking his donkey, and the donkey opens his mouth and says, I think it's a she, opens her mouth and says, Bilam, haven't I been your trusty steed for so long, like 20 years or something? You think that I'm putting you in danger right now? So I think that the rabbis like to extrapolate that and say, well, that's a piece of what's happening in all of these stories. That at some point the Malach Shel Shamayim came out and said, you don't have to go this way. You can turn around and you can do the right thing. But they didn't listen. Joe, you have, why are 3 or 4 idiots included with the 3 kings in the
Yeah,
story?
going back to the first sentence in the paragraph in the reading,
Yeah.
I can't see the significance of including those what they, in quotes, called idiots with the 3 kings, unless the 3 kings were considered idiots also because of their behavior.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe they were.
Okay.
It's interesting. It's interesting, first of all, the different caliber of people, and Peter, you mentioned that, we're not seeing the worst of the worst on this list. We're seeing people who were not great leaders, but also were not awful. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and maybe it can relate to our lives also in the way that none of us are heaven forbid, completely awful. Thank God. And yet we all have some flaws, and this is an opportunity, I guess, for us to say, well, are we going to get in or not? Okay, the Gemara picks it up. Oh, let me share my screen again. Okay, so the Gemara picks us up and says, "V'chol kach lama," and why is one punished? And I wish Erin was here because this was her question last time and her dissatisfaction. Why is a person punished for saying that there's no resurrection of the dead in the Torah? Why would that be? Why would that be? Our sages are actually wondering that when they write this Mishnah. And we see Tana, we see that word, that repetition word. It's translated that it's taught, but it really means that it's repeated. Hu kvar b'tchiyat hametim. If a person already said that they don't think that the resurrection of the dead is a part of the Torah, or even if they don't think that it exists at all, lefichach lo yiyeh lo chelek b'tchiyat hametim, then they won't have a part in B'tchiyat HaMetim, in resurrection of the dead. Makes pretty good sense, actually. It also tells us that in order to get into Olam Haba, in order to have some kind of Olam Haba, resurrection of the dead is a prerequisite. And it keeps going. Shekol midotav shel hakadosh baruch hu midah keneged midah. Okay, so we have this midah keneged midah phrase here. That basically means the punishment fits the crime. It means literally measure for measure or measure against measure, but colloquially the punishment fits the crime. So we see that all of the measurements of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, all of the measurements of the Holy Blessed One are, in a way, the punishment fits the crime. Okay, and we can see that in this punishment. Pretty straightforward. And we continue. Damar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Nachman, this thing that Rabbi Nachman said. Minayin shekol midotav shel hakadosh baruch hu midah keneged midah. So that we pick up on this last piece. From where is it derived? So basically the Gemara is saying, you're telling me that all of the Kadosh Baruch Hu's, all of the Holy Blessed One's measurements are measure for measure. They're all in a way that the punishment fits the crime. I'm looking for a verse in Tanakh that tells me that that is the case. And we see it, Shene'emar, as it said, Vayomer Elisha, Shim'u devar Hashem v'gomer, and the verse kind of continues, and then ke'et machar se'ah solet b'shekel v'sa'atayim se'orim b'shekel b'sha'ar shomron. Okay, so here we have Elisha, a prophet, saying, hear the word of the Lord, and he's talking to all of the people of Israel at this point. Tomorrow, a se'ah, which is a measurement of fine flour, will be sold for 1 shekel, and 2 se'ah, and you can see this cute thing in Hebrew that happens when you get 2. You don't have shtei se'ah or shtaim se'im or something like that. Instead, you have sa'atayim. The words are combined, which is very cute linguistically. So 2 se'ah of barley are also going to be worth a shekel. And that's going to be out on the gate of Samaria. So the gates were really the places where there were tons of marketing. There were tons of markets, tons of little shukiot or shukim. And some of them were not so little. So this was a place where goods were being sold at this gate. Okay. So then we haven't quite understood why that is midah keneged midah, but we'll see in a second. Sorry, I lost my place. Uchtiv. Okay, as it is written, Vayan hashalish asher hamelech nishan al yado et ish ha-Elohim vayomer hine Hashem oseh arubot bashamayim haiheh hadavar hazeh vayomer hincha ro'eh be'einecha umisham lo tochel. Okay, and then we have another verse from Kings. It keeps going, as it is written. And the officer, and I actually want to give a little bit of a gloss here. The official or the officer on whose arm the king leaned, so the king's personal attendant or perhaps even a military officer, answered the man of God, Ha'ish Elohim, answered the man of God and said, behold, in order for this to occur, in order for this se'ah thing to occur, the Lord would have to make windows in the heavens and bring down produce through them. But would this thing really happen? He, Elisha, said to him prophetically, behold, you will see it with your eyes, but you will not eat it. So you'll witness this miracle, but you won't get to benefit from it. And Elisha is not just talking to the people of Israel here, he's actually talking to Yerovam specifically in this second verse. So he's saying, look, here is this moment of measure for measure. Yerovam is trying to get this thing to happen, trying to get the prices down, and Elisha says, you know what, it's going to happen, but you are not going to benefit from it. Same thing. You are going to be able to go lead your own kingdom, right? You're going to be able to split off in this life, but you're not going to benefit from Olam Haba. You're not going to have that lasting, eternal, whatever Olam Haba is, which maybe we'll see next time. Okay, so we keep going. And we see, as it is written, it continues, Uchtiv, Vayhi lo kain va'yir misu, Oto ha'am ba'sha'ar vayamot. And this is exactly what happened to Yerovam. He went down to the gate and he was looking to get a good deal, looking to see all of this shuk beauty. And it's so exciting, and there are so many things to kind of tantalize your senses at the shuk. People are yelling. There are amazing smells. There's all of this beautiful food. He goes out, and what happens? The people trample him at the gate, and he died. Okay, so here we have the Gemara coming in. Vidilma, and perhaps Kililat Elisha Garama Le. And perhaps it was this curse of Elisha, Kilalat Elisha, the curse of Elisha, that caused this to happen, that caused this instance. Da'amar, Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, Kilalat Chacham. Okay, so it wasn't just a curse of Elisha, it was a curse of a wise person, a curse of a sage. Afilu al chinam hi ba'a. A curse of a sage, even if it was baseless, it still happened. Im kain, and so, lichtov kra, and I'll try to get the English in the same frame. Vayirmasuhu, and he was trampled, vayamot, and he died. My basha'ar, what's up with around the gate? Al iske sha'ar. He was busying himself around the gate. And if we look at this beautiful drash, we'll see it was for the cynical dismissal of the prophecy of Elisha that the officer voiced at the city gate that he was punished measure for measure and was trampled at the city gate. There's also a amazing kind of mystical interpretation of this piece that Yerovam also on Yom Kippur, of course, that Yom Kippur wasn't exactly the same kind of thing as it is today. On Yom Kippur, this holiest day of the year, Yerovam cursed God. So that's also a piece of what could have happened and what could have done him in. Yes, Joe.
We're back a paragraph or two. You hear me?
Yeah, we
okay.
can.
Back a paragraph or two, there's a word afilu.
Yeah.
Could you bring that up again?
Sure.
And tell me if that's the same word that appears in the four kashas, in the four questions at Passover. Yeah. Afilu pa'amachas. What does that mean?
Afilu means despite or even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Afilu pa'am echad, even one time.
Right.
We dip the vegetables twice, but usually during the other nights we don't even dip one time.
That's what I recall. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Doug and Marge.
I confess to you, Rabbi, I am totally lost here.
Oh no.
We started with the proposition that God hands out measure for measure
Yeah,
in dispensing justice, can we say? But it's a measure for measure. And
right.
then the rabbis go into this proof text.
Yes.
And I absolutely cannot follow why this is the best example they could come up with for why God metes out justice measure for measure. It seems to me there are more than enough other more cogent examples. I mean, he drowned the Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea,
Yep. Yep. I was
as
gonna say
payback
just
for
that.
400 years of slavery. I get that. But I do not follow this argument at all.
Yeah, it is a challenging one to understand. So basically what happens is that Yerovam, the king, is attempting to create some sort of situation around the gate of Samaria, which is this Shuk area. And he's trying to make it happen, but he's not able to do it. And then Elisha the prophet is able to make it happen for him. However, just like he was able to secede from the full oneness of the Israelite people and secede into the Israelite northern kingdom, he was also able to have this happen in his lifetime, this economic change. However, he was not able to benefit from it. And so he went down to the gate in order to attempt to benefit from it, and he was unsuccessful and died. That's kind of the gist. It's not the most coherent piece of Talmud I've ever seen in my life, I have to admit.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, it just seems to me the rabbis could have come up with a much more succinct, precise, and cogent argument than the one they made.
I think you're right. Luckily for us, we're gonna skip a little bit and we're going to move into a piece that I think A will be a little bit more cogent, but B is also just a lot of fun because we see some people that we're not really expecting to see. So what I'm skipping over here are two real sugiot. The first is about truma and purity. Truma is the mandatory tithe to the priests and whether or not they can eat it at certain times. And then there's also a piece that we're skipping over here that says that has a heretic saying, I don't believe that this world to come is in the Tanakh at all. And Rabban Gamliel says, oh no, it's in every single chunk of the Tanakh. There's a verse for Torah, there's a verse for Nevi'im, for the prophets, there's a verse for Ketuvim, for the writings. And he proves his point pretty well. But we're going to skip to a fun interaction. Here we go. Can we see the screen? No, let's share. Okay, so we have here a fun little sugya that I think we'll enjoy together. Sha'ala Cleopatra. Cleopatra asked, or Cleopatra Malkta, the queen, asked Rabbi Meir. Okay, so already there's some strangeness here, right? Because Cleopatra lived significantly earlier than Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is around 200 CE. Cleopatra is around the turn of the century. She's just before year zero. Famously falling on her sword at a young age, only being queen for just a little while. Okay, so we have her in conversation with Rabbi Meir, which is kind of strange. I'll ask you what you think about that later. And she says, Yadana dechai shachve. I know that there are these people who are going to be buried and are dead and then are going to live again. Dichtiv, as it is written, and here she is quoting the Tanakh, Vayatzitzu meir ka'esev haaretz. Okay, so she says, and may they blossom out of the city like grass of the earth. So she's saying that these people, when they come alive again, are going to come up out of the ground like grass from the earth. Ella, rather, keshehen omdin arumin o bilvushehen omdim. Okay, so she has an interesting question here, which I don't know if you were thinking about in our zombie apocalypse, Olam Haba. But she says, but are these people when they rise up, right? Omed, stand up, when they stand up, are they going to rise up naked or are they going to rise up clothed? Okay, so just some historical context here. So Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt, we know that. She inherited the throne when she was very young, and she was a powerful ruler who dreamed of a world empire. After the death of Caesar, her first husband, she became the ruler of Egypt. In addition to this, she later became the wife of the famous Mark Antony. She declared that she was the new Isis, Isis being the most famous of the Egyptian goddesses. And eventually her enemies captured her after the death of her husband, and she fell on her sword, as we said. But I want to talk about Egyptian death practices for a moment, because they were buried not only with their wealth, but sometimes even with their servants. So the Great Pyramids were actually found to be burial chambers for the great rulers of Egypt and all of the people who helped them. And they had provisions there and all kinds of things like that. And so her question is not just about the actual clothing that she's going to be allegedly resurrected in, but it's about all of those provisions, all of those pieces that are in her tomb, in her catacomb. Okay. And that was also probably tied up in not only a level of leadership and status, but also the spiritual psyche and the ego that comes along with having that kind of wealth in this society. Okay, so she asked this question, and Amarla, Rabbi Meir, says to her, Kal v'chomer mechita. So kal v'chomer, I'm sure we've run into that phrase before, but kal v'chomer is a Talmudic phrase, and it's a specific halachic inference. So the words literally mean, kal means like leniency or lightness, and chomer means strictness. If you're used to Yiddish, a stringency is a chumrah, right? A chumrah and a kula. And often you'll see this translated, and you'll see it right here, a fortiori. This term usually refers to a moment in halacha from a halacha of lesser consequence to one of greater consequence, or vice versa. So an example of this, if a restriction applies on a festival whose statute is relatively low, it most certainly applies to Shabbat, which has a relatively high status, if that makes sense. So in layman's terms, kal v'chomer means all the more so. So he's saying all the more so mechita about the wheat. Here we go. So here's our little analogy. Umachita she nikbara aruma. Okay, so and the wheat, the chita, is buried naked. Yotz'a bekama levushin. It comes up from the ground with some sort of dressing, with some sort of clothing, right? And of course, that's the shaft that we cut away from the wheat afterward. Tzadikim, so the righteous among us, shenikbarim bilvushehen, who are buried in our clothing, not exactly the clothing that we wear every day, of course, some sort of burial shrouds. Al achat kama v'kama, all the more so would they come up in clothing. Would they be brought forth from the earth, stand once again, arise with clothing, with their garments. Okay, so that's our Cleopatra moment. Then we have Amar le Caesar le Rabban Gamliel. Okay, so we had Cleopatra and Rabbi Meir up here, and now we have a moment for the Roman Emperor and Rabban Gamliel. And this was actually a match that probably a conversation that might have occurred because these two people lived around the same time. Rabban Gamliel was the inheritor of the position of Nasi from Yehuda HaNasi. He was the second to inherit this position. And that was really a liaison position for Am Yisrael, for the Israelite people, to the greater Roman authority. So this conversation could have happened. So the Roman emperor says to Rabban Gamliel, Amritu deshachve chaye. You say that these people who are dead will live again. Chayi. Ha-havu afra ve'afra mi chaye. Okay, so, but aren't they in the dust? Dust doesn't come back to life. Okay. And then enter the Roman emperor's daughter, who somehow is able to kind of step to her father in this moment, the emperor. Amra le barate, and she says to Rabban Gamliel here, Shivke, I'll take care of this. You leave. Ve'ana mahadarna le. And I'll answer him. I'll respond to him. And we love this word hadar, right? In Aramaic here, we see that this is the same as the word chazar in Hebrew, which means to return. It's not the tshuva return, the teshuva return, but it is the more colloquial return. Okay, so then we have Shnei Yotzrim. Then we have a kind of parable, another interesting analogy. She says to her father, Shnei Yotzrim yesh be'irenu. We have two craftsmen in our city. Echad yotzer mein hamayim. One of them creates from water, which is surprising. What are we creating from water? I guess ice sculptures, maybe. Ve'echad yotzer min hativ, and another one creates from mortar or mud, some kind of mud. Eze mehen mishubach. Which one is more notable? Which one is more choice? Amarla, he said to her, Zeh she yotzer min hamayim. The one who creates from mayim, from water. Amra lo, she said to him, min hamayim sar, min hativ lo kol shekain. Okay, so if we look down at the bottom here, she says to him, he fashions or he creates from if he creates for a vessel or something from water, all the more so, it is not clear that he can fashion vessels from mortar. Okay. And then it seems to just drift off. Any ideas of what we make of that? It's hard stuff today. It's hard stuff today. Let's here, here, I'll keep it up so that we can kind of look at it. So we have a few interactions. We have this one interaction with Cleopatra. That one I feel like is pretty straightforward. We have some thumbs up. Do we feel like we understand that one? Should we go over that one again?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go over that one again. Okay, so Cleopatra and Rabbi Meir. This conversation, it could not have happened. And Cleopatra says to Rabbi Meir, you know, I know this thing from Torah, which is kind of strange, right? Our rabbis love to make these people who probably wouldn't know something about Torah somehow in their imaginations know Torah. And she says, I know that the dead are going to come alive, but are they going to come alive naked or going to come alive with their clothing? And he says to her, well, just like a piece of wheat is put into the ground naked and comes up with clothing, all the more so someone who is put into the ground with clothing will come up with their clothing. Okay.
What?
So why do we think we have this? Let's start there. Why do we think we have this in our text? Why do we think our rabbis are trying to put this into our text? Yeah, Doug and Marge.
Wait, another stab here. I guess it's to kind of, how does it happen that resurrection happens is I guess the fundamental question here. How is it that, dust suddenly reanimates? And I think the kind of argument here is that the rabbis are putting for, in the light case, coal, it's a sheaf of wheat. You put in a seed, it comes up with a dressing.
Right.
Who could make a vessel out of water? Well, nobody. It's not humanly possible. But it is possible, to make something out of clay and mortar and mud. So if God could, make a vessel out of water, let's say the creation story.
Yes, yes.
Then how much easier would it be to actually, work with a substrate?
Exactly. So we're skipping over Cleopatra there and going to the Rabban Gamliel and the Roman emperor and his daughter. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. This not quite a parable, but an analogy is saying that God can make something from water just like God did during creation. And therefore, the mortar, all the more easy to make something out of that. Okay.
Okay. Got it now.
Okay. You got that one, Audrey?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But I actually want to ask you, we have these interesting pairings here, these interesting people that are inserted into our text. Why do you think they're inserted into our text here? And do you think that this specific subject was something of importance?
What was the Egyptian idea? What was the resurrection? Was that included in the Egyptian belief?
Yeah, so resurrection was included in Egyptian belief, absolutely.
That's
But
the pyramids, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, just the fact that the pyramids evidently had items that they would need when they come back after.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so it was natural to say something will occur beyond nothing. There will be some kind of a resurrection.
Yeah, I think people also lived a lot younger at that point. So I think people probably felt like this can't be all that there is. Um, and it's interesting here we have Cleopatra saying, I already know that this is what's going to happen, but I need to know specifically, am I going to be able to hold on to my stuff? Arlene, and then Michelle.
I think that during Egyptian times, Osiris was in charge of what happened to people after they passed away. And I think that a lot of this had to have influenced the Jews in terms of how they were going to account for what happens to our bodies, what happens to our whole existence after we pass. Of course, they were influenced by other earlier movements of people who had different religious beliefs, but nevertheless were faced with the same issues.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Michelle.
So first, the obvious response, well, of course, this was important. Everything that's written down in the Talmud was important to somebody or at some time, because otherwise they would not have bothered. I mean, this is very much a economic
Right.
by parallel, you focus or whatever data pair thing, you focus on what's important to you.
Right.
And work really hard at it. And this is something that that continues to intrigue me, that they work so hard at these justifications, at these stories, at these approaches. One of the things that has helped me at least deal a little bit with Talmud study, which I have a lot of trouble with, is that the rabbis, the authors, felt very much, and it helped me to understand that they felt they had to find things entirely within their world. So part of what comes with the Enlightenment is incorporating things we learned from the outside world, whereas they felt the need to somehow find a way to justify everything within their world. The interesting contrast here is that the felt need, implied need to go to outside authorities and yet seem to stay within their own world. So you have the rabbi consulting Queen Cleopatra, who then cites Tanakh,
Right.
right? And my brain is getting twisted in following the logic of all of this.
Yeah. All of our brains, I think, are getting twisted.
Yes.
Go ahead, Doug and Marge.
Just to clarify, it wasn't the rabbis who asked the question of these prominent people. It was these prominent people, Cleopatra and the emperor, who asked the question of the rabbis.
Right.
And I'm seeing maybe this is a little bit like, people. This is exactly the kind of question we would expect from the Goyim. This is exactly this is exactly kind of, I'm using it as, a Goyish cuff kind of question. Oh, are we coming up resurrected naked, or are we going to have clothes on? Yeah, so the rabbis are kind of saying, yeah, this is the kind of stupid question we would have from these outliers, Cleopatra and the Roman emperor, because we want you to reject them. Cleopatra as being an Egyptian, the emperor as being Roman, the inheritor of the Greek civilization, and that's what I'm taking away from why these two people suddenly make an appearance.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So I love that, and I also think that there's a piece here that's trying to say, actually, the rabbis are just as important as Cleopatra and just as important as the Roman emperor, which we know they weren't. We can say with full confidence that they were not on the same level as these people, and yet they have them asking, as you said, not such smart questions, and also having them kind of at their mercy to give any kind of analogy that they possibly can. I mean, in this second one, the Roman emperor is being outdone by his daughter, which is an amazing thing to see. Audrey and then Michelle.
All right. My question isn't tied to the text. It's from something about the text. When you talk about the 10 tribes, I guess, who went north, in the northern kingdom, are they considered to be presently part of the Jewish people, or is it historically only? I mean, the kingdom was the surviving part of the Jewish people was supposed to be from the house of David, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the surviving part of the Jewish people was the the southern um, the southern kingdom of Judah.
Okay,
These other tribes are seen as the lost tribes.
they're lost. Okay, but okay, so I mean, it's a stupid question, but in any case, I'm a little confused because my husband's Hebrew name is Ruvain, and that's one of the lost tribes, right?
Yeah, yes, that I mean that's true, but it's also but all of those names are still recorded in the Tanakh. You know, like we still have access to them, even though we no longer have access to perhaps that lineage, if that makes sense.
So they're not thinking makes much sense. But
So we have
so they're
access.
gone, they're finished.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
Some people say that they're finished. You know, there is a Ugandan and Ethiopian contingent of Jews that say that they are from these lost tribes.
Right.
Um, and it seems based on the Talmud that it could be true. They would also perhaps be the descendants of these people who are not getting into Olam Haba, according to this passage. Which is
So I should tell my husband when he comes home. Right?
No.
but in terms of being named after these people, the 12 tribes were still the original pieces of Israel, right? The 12 tribes are named after the 12 children of Jacob.
Jacob,
So
right.
there's still characters in our Tanakh. They're still with us. It's just that the tribes themselves, that lineage might no longer be with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Michelle.
So I love Doug's interpretation of the discussion of this nudity, but I also want to suggest it could also reflect the rabbis or the redactors' discomfort with nudity.
Maybe. I don't know.
Arlene might not agree with you.
No, I'm not sure that I do.
Yeah. Okay. We just have about 10 more minutes. So I want to close with a piece here from Brachot. So we have this piece in the middle of all of these blessings, which is really beautiful. We have blessing after blessing after blessing. And then we have this very sweet Mishnah.
Ah.
Let me share one more time.
Oh.
Okay.
Ah.
Okay. So we have Rabbi Nehunya ben Hakana, Hayamit Palel bichnisato levet hamidrash uvitziato tfila ktsara. So when he went into the Beit Midrash, he would say a little prayer, and then when he left the Beit Midrash, he would also say a little prayer. And this is one of the places where, by the way, we have Ma tovu halecha Yaakov. That's why we say that in the beginning of many of our prayers on Saturday morning or any other morning, by the way. Amrulo, he said, Ma makom litfila zo. So they said to him, his disciples said to him, what room is there for this prayer? Why do you do this, basically? Is there a place for this? Amar lahem, he said to them, Bichnisati ani mitpalel shelo ye'ara Devar takala al yadi. So he said to them, upon my entrance, I pray that no mishap transpire, and uvitziati, upon my leaving, ani noten hoda'a al chelki. I give thanks for my part, my share. And then we have a little piece here on that just a little bit later about the world to come. Okay, so what do we do to get into the world to come is the question. Amru Rabotenu here, Rabbeinu, Lamdenu orchot chaim v'niskeh bahen l'chaye ha'olam haba. The sages taught. They said to him, this piece right here, teach us paths of life, and we will thereby merit the life of the world to come. Okay, so being taught by rabbis, so you guys are all in the world to come, congratulations. Going after knowledge. And then we have this piece here. He said to them, Amar lahem, Hizaharu bichvod chavrechem umin'u b'nechem min hahigayon uvhoshivum ben birkei talmidei chachamim uchshatem mitpalelim de'u lifnei mi atem omdim. Right? So we've seen that probably upon many different arcs. Know who you stand before, nor know before who you stand. Uvishvil kach tizku l'chaye ha'olam haba. Okay, and he said to them, we'll read the whole thing. He said to them, be vigilant in the honor of your counterparts. Counterparts is really here your friends or your fellows, and prevent your children from logic. So here's that same word, that higa that we had before. And are we sure that it's logic? It might be some kind of, as the gloss says, study of heresy, study toward heresy. And place your children while they are still young between the knees of Torah scholars. And when you pray, know before whom you stand. For doing that, you will merit the life in the world to come. So, all of these things are going to help us merit the life to the world in the world to come. We saw on one side the things that we shouldn't be doing today, and now we've seen on the other side the things that we should be doing. There is some amount of reward and punishment that we talked about last week. There is some amount of, if I do this, I will get this, and if I don't do this, I will have this. However, there's also something deeper, I think, here. We have these beautiful images of being close to Torah scholars. We have these beautiful images of being kind to one another. We have these beautiful images of going after knowledge. It's not just, if I do this thing, I'll get into Olam Haba. It's that each of these things are adding to this Olam, to Olam Hazeh, the world that we're living in now. And perhaps that, adding value to our lives now, is what actually allows us to get into Olam Haba in the end. We have some comments. Judy, and then Joe.
This goes back to what I had said. However, I know it sounded very extreme, but if your children are allowed logic of heresy, that's a sin. You should keep your children protected to study the words of Torah and things that are allowed within the religion, our religion. So I think it still rings in that way. It's a sin to go out in the world and see people naked and be exposed to what's out there, which is terrible, of course. But anyway, it's part of that holiness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is certainly a piece of holiness of and when we look at the word kadosh, the word kadosh has an element of separateness there too. Yeah. Joe, you had your hand up.
Oh, you answered my question in your last comment.
Oh, okay. And Doug and Marge.
Is this kind of a proof test that the Haredi use for not educating their young men in secular knowledge?
Yeah, I mean this and many others. For better or for worse, our people were interested in carving out a place for themselves in the greater society, and not just in one insular tiny community. And so they they created pathways. If you wanted to see these kinds of paths of isolation, they're created here. And I wouldn't say that our people as a whole have really gone the stringent path, um, and attempted to be as isolated as possible. But certainly, if you want to see it, it's there. Although, I mean, I'll also say, like, Shivim Panim, there are 70 faces of God. There are 70 faces of almost every word in the Torah, and 70 being the number that symbolizes an infinite. So if you want to see other things, if you want to see inclusivity, right? If you wanted to see that you should what was the specific wording? That you should show kavod and be vigilant in showing kavod to your friends. That's also there. That's also there. So it's about what we want to see.
I'm going to have a very serious talk with Rabbi Blake about throwing you to the wolves this morning to teach probably the most difficult piece of Gemara we've encountered in a long time. I'm having a serious talk with Rabbi Blake about that.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. You as his father, you should feel ready to have any kind of serious talk you'd like.
And we do.
Good, good. Friends, it's so wonderful to learn with you. I'm sorry that it was challenging today. Hopefully in future moments of learning, it will be less challenging.
Challenging is good, Rabbi. Challenging is very good.
I agree.
There'd be no point. Right.
Yeah.
Alissa, I just want to remind you, we need the link for Micah's presentation.
Yes, I will send, I'll have Steve send that out.
Okay.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Kol hakavod.
Wonderful to be with you.
Ann Cohn, nice to see you. How you doing?